Toward the end of Season 2, Stringer Bell and Prop Joe find themselves struggling to come up with a plan on how to get rid of Brother Mouzone. Stringer doesn't want to try take him out in case word got back to Avon, and Joe doesn't want to try take him out simply because he's terrified of Brother Mouzone coming after him. And so they both come up with a plan. Joe organises a meet at Butchie's bar between Stringer Bell and Omar Little, and Stringer lies to Omar about who it is really did his boy Brandon a year prior, all in the hopes that Omar would go after Brother Mouzone, thus putting an end to his and Joe's problem. The plan goes south, however, as Omar gives Brother Mouzone a moment to defend himself, who reveals to Omar that he had in fact been given some wrong information. He'd been lied to.
You think brother played me?
No. Y'all can't read lying eyes after all these years. And I'll be talking to a dead man.
Now the issue here is that Butchie praises Omar for his ability to figure out when he's being lied to, which frankly doesn't make any sense seeing as though he'd just been lied to and played by Stringer Bell. Which begs the question, why did Omar believe a word that came out of Stringer Bell's mouth? Stringer lied to Omar at their last parlay. Why would he switch up now, especially when they had no real reason to meet? Now many argue that Omar was so filled with fury that such simply got in the way of his better judgment. He let it get personal, and that's why he made the mistake of taking Stringer at his word. However, there's still several issues with this line of thinking. Firstly, why wasn't Omar made aware of Brother Mouzone like he was all the other muscle? He knew the Barksdale crew inside out. Assuming Stringer's story were true, why wouldn't he know Brother Mouzone? Secondly, why would the Barksdales let a random mercenary who they had brought in have free reign when it came to torturing Brandon? It was the Barksdales Brandon robbed. Why let some random have all the fun? Thirdly, why would Stringer willingly give up one of his soldiers? He highlights that Weebay, Bird and Stinkum are all gone, and so why would Stringer willingly give up muscle he clearly couldn't afford to spare? And finally, Stringer claims that Brother tortured Brandon because he was building a rep for himself. If true, why hasn't Omar heard of this Brother Mouzone? Stringer's story is simply too weak, and to expect anybody to buy the fact that Omar Little would himself buy such lies, it goes beyond the typical suspension of disbelief. After Omar robs the entirety of the co-op's resupply, Prop Joe introduces Marlo to the Connect so to convince him that the robbery wasn't an inside job. Slim and Cheese then raise concerns to Prop Joe about the possibility of Marlo going around the co-op in an attempt to try and acquire the Connect for his own. To which Joe tells the two that the Greeks would never side with somebody they don't know. They're simply too careful. A few episodes later, however, and rest in peace Joe. Which begs two different questions. Why did Joe not acknowledge the ever so obvious threat that was Marlo Stanfield? And why did the Greeks side with Marlo over Prop Joe? The two most common answers for our first question is A, that Joe didn't want to kill Marlo and subsequently create a power vacuum on the street. Another war would most definitely erupt, and with war comes bodies, and with bodies come the BPD. And B, is that Joe honestly believed that if he took Marlo under his wing, he actually might befriend Marlo and thus no longer be a threat. Hence, I treated you like a son line right before he was killed. However, my issue with this is that Joe acknowledges and acts accordingly to every other threat on the show. He never gives the lion a reason to hunt him down, and always makes sure that there's a safety net between him and a bullet. And with Marlo being the biggest threat, who Joe acknowledges several times as being so, I just don't buy the fact that he chose to do nothing about it. Don't get me wrong, I understand why he introduced him to the Connect, but to simply leave it at that, and just trust that both Marlo and the Greeks, who have proven to Joe in Season 2 aren't anything other than a business partner, wouldn't just go behind Joe's back and snatch the safety net right out from under him. It's a plot hole for sure.
Where you say you off to again?
The most common argument for the Greeks siding with Marlo over Prop Joe was simply that Marlo showed the money, and he also wouldn't stop coming around until he got what he was after, which makes absolutely no sense. Marlo was a street dealer who had never operated at a high level, had no connections with City Hall, and who proved to the Greeks had little to no idea about how to launder his money. As far as they were concerned, he was imprisonment waiting to happen. And so why on God's green earth would they give up somebody in Joe, who not once has ever given them an issue, for somebody who you've known no longer than a year, is clearly hungry to take out Prop Joe, thus also proving that he doesn't care about murder, and therefore the eyes of the BPD. It was simply a rushed plot point and an unrealistic way to have Marlo wear the crown. Perhaps if Marlo were to have found out about Joe's true involvement in the robbery, and he were to have brought this information to the Greek, who then decided to give up Prop Joe, this storyline might have made sense. But he didn't, and so it doesn't. Omar Little is introduced to us scoping out a stash house in the pit. Later that night, he and his crew rob the stash, and during the robbery, Omar gets angry at his partner for spilling his name, which once again makes absolutely no sense, as just an episode later he's seen using his reputation as a tool to rob people. Which begs the question, why get angry at your partner for spilling your name, if your entire goal is to have said name ring out? Does Omar only want to be known by the puppies on the corner? If so, why rob Avon Barksdale? When the police pick up Sergei in Season 2, he snitches on Vondas and gives up the location of the Greek so to save himself from death row. He takes the police to a hotel, only to find out that the Greek and Vondas had just escaped. The cigarettes they smoke still burning as the police search the room. Later on, Sergei can be seen with Marlo Stanfield, who had tracked down Sergei in the hopes that he might be able to put him into contact with the Greek. Which begs the question, if Sergei snitched on the Greek, why not only is he still alive, but also still in contact with those he snitched on? The common argument is that Sergei's snitching was all a part of the contingency plan. Give the police what you know so to save yourself, and the Greek will make his escape before the police can act on any of the information you've given them. Which, if true, the Greek and Vondas either got extremely lucky with their escape, or had planned so far in advance that their timing was nothing short of perfection. Sergei being spared wasn't so much a plot hole, rather just a lack of understanding from the audience, as we truly underestimated the genius of the Greek and his operation. However, one fact still remains, which is that Vondas and the Greek are still wanted in the state of Maryland. Yet for some reason, they both decide to come back to Baltimore and carry on business as usual, regardless of the fact that they were still wanted by the BPD. Which begs another question, why did the Greeks come back to Baltimore? The common argument is that the BPD had simply moved on, and the feds were only interested in terrorism or political corruption, and so a man like the Greek was just not on anybody's radar, which still doesn't make all that much sense. You see, the Greeks were heavily implied to operate across the USA, and Vondas proves in Season 2 that there are men who can carry on the Baltimore operation without him and the Greek being there. And so why chance it? Why come back to a place where you narrowly escape jail? Even if the police aren't actively looking into you, all it takes is for one major trafficker to get jammed up, and just hint at the possibility of the Greeks being back in town. The case comes out the box it were left in, and the likes of Vondas would get arrested for a murder he's already been put in for. Also, Fitch seemingly catches wind of the Greek's mole in the FBI, yet does nothing about it. Which begs another question. Why? There's simply too many unanswered questions surrounding this part of the story, and too many stupid, risky decisions made by characters we've been led to believe would never make such decisions.
The Greek will be angry.
This is business, Ethan. The Greek, he will be smart.
There are many plot holes on the show, some big, some small. However, there are some that I've seen floating around the internet that aren't actually plot holes and can be explained, which is exactly what I want you all to do in the comments section. Why didn't Omar know about Marlo Stanfield? How did Omar go from nobody knowing his name when we first saw him rob the pit, to everybody knowing his name no more than 2 episodes later? And finally, why is the character of Scott Templeton so villainous without reason?